All right, welcome everyone to Poetry 101. Go ahead and get your notebooks ready. I am absolutely thrilled to be your guide today as we explore one of the most enduring, fascinating, and musical forms of poetry in human history. In this explainer, we're putting a magnifying glass over a very specific, incredibly powerful poetic form, the ballad. We're going to break down its DNA, figure out exactly why it's been so popular for centuries, and learn how to spot one out in the wild.
Okay, let's just dive right in. Here's our syllabus for today's explainer. 1. Defining the core. 2. Oral origins. 3. The architecture. 4. Folk versus literary. 5. Famous examples. And finally, 6. The professor's cheat sheet.
Section 1. Defining the core. What exactly are we looking at here?
Think of narrative poetry as this giant umbrella that our subject sits under. Now, unlike lyric poetry, the kind that's primarily focused on expressing deep, internal, personal feelings of a single speaker, narrative poetry functions strictly as a storytelling medium. It's exactly what it sounds like, a form of poetry that tells a story, complete with characters, a setting, a plot, the whole shebang. When you're reading narrative poetry, you aren't just absorbing a mood. You're actively watching a tale unfold from beginning to end.
So let's narrow it down to the ballad itself. Historically, the word actually comes from the Latin ballare, which means to dance, and honestly, that gives you an immediate hint about its musical, rhythmic nature. Put simply, a ballad is a shorter narrative poem that tells a dramatic, often tragic, or romantic folk tale. So the crucial point to remember is this. While an epic poem, like Homer's Iliad, is a massive, sprawling narrative covering thousands of lines, the ballad is its much punchier cousin. It cuts right to the emotional core.
Moving to Section 2. Oral origins. Where did the ballad actually come from?
I want you to picture a group of people gathered around a fire, centuries ago. Long before widespread literacy, before you could just go buy a mass-produced book, information had to survive purely by word of mouth. Ballads originated within these oral traditions as popular narrative songs. These three pillars, originating in oral traditions, serving as a way to preserve history, and being passed down to keep cultural myths alive, are absolutely foundational. They were essentially highly effective tools to record central dramatic events and teach lessons from one generation to the next. And because they literally had to be committed to memory, they relied heavily on distinct rhythms and repetitive musicality.
Section 3. The architecture. Building a ballad. All right, let's pop the hood and look at the mechanical blueprint. First off, ballads are generally built using quatrains, which you remember, are simply stanzas composed of 4 lines. Second, they utilize a driving iambic rhythm. And third, they follow a very specific, memorable rhyme scheme. In traditional English ballads, this is most commonly an ABCB pattern, meaning the second and fourth lines rhyme, or sometimes an alternating ABAB pattern. This incredibly strict, predictable organization is exactly what made them so easy to memorize for all that oral storytelling we just talked about.
And this brilliantly illustrates what we call the common meter. Visualizing this in 2 columns really helps break it down. You see, a standard ballad quatrain alternates its line lengths. So lines 1 and 3 are slightly longer, featuring 4 iambic stresses. Lines 2 and 4 are shorter, featuring only 3 iambic stresses. This creates a really distinct, bouncing musical rhythm. It's a rhythm so deeply embedded in our linguistic history that actually, it's the exact same meter widely used in traditional religious hymns.
Now, let's quickly demystify that word iambic. An iambic is a metrical foot, a rhythmic unit basically, consisting of 2 syllables, an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. Da, dum, da, dum, da, dum. It perfectly mimics a human heartbeat. So when we talk about a 4-stressed iambic line, we literally mean there are 4 of those heavily stressed da-dum heartbeats driving that specific line. This reliable, marching pulse is the absolute lifeblood that propels the narrative forward.
Okay, Section 4. Folk versus literary ballads.
So, we have 2 primary categories to weigh against each other here. First up are the folk ballads, born of the campfire and oral tradition. Their authors are entirely unknown, they belong to the collective culture, and focus purely on recounting a tragic, comic, or heroic dramatic event, without a ton of deep internal psychological analysis. Contrasting that, we have literary ballads. Beginning in the Renaissance and getting super popular from the Romantic era onward, these are written by specific, known poets who intentionally adapted those ancient folk conventions to craft highly sophisticated, stylized narrative poems.
Section 5.
Famous ballad examples. Looking at classic folk ballads, we have iconic titles like Barbara Allen and John Henry. Now remember our criteria. These are anonymous, culturally ingrained narratives. They deal with universally understood themes. You've got the tragic, thorny rose of unrequited love in Barbara Allen, where sweet William dies for love and Barbara dies of sorrow. Or, the heroic, doomed struggle of man against machine in John Henry, which famously captures that driving rhythm of a 9-pound hammer swinging against a steam drill.
Shifting over to the literary ballads, we see master authors utilizing the form to tell sweeping, often supernatural tales. In your studies, you will almost certainly encounter Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which brings us the haunting imagery of the cursed sailor and the doomed albatross hung around his neck. Or maybe John Keats's La Belle Dame sans Merci, where a pale, loitering knight-at-arms is seduced and abandoned by a fairy lady. These romantic poets knew exactly what they were doing. They understood that the ancient, song-like structure of the ballad was the perfect atmospheric vehicle to deliver these chilling narratives.
Now, what's really interesting here is Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee, which is just an absolute masterclass in this form. Poe leaned heavily into the requirement that a ballad be both deeply romantic and tragic. Just listen to the rhythm of his opening lines. It was many and many a year ago, in a kingdom by the sea. He uses that hypnotic, driving repetition we just discussed to tell the story of a love so intense that even the angels in heaven were jealous, resulting, of course, in the tragic death of his beautiful Annabel Lee. It's truly a textbook example of the literary ballad operating at maximum emotional capacity.
All right, Section 6, The Professor's Cheat Sheet. So if you're taking a poetry exam or just reading an anthology for fun, run the poem you're looking at through this quick 4-step diagnostic checklist. Ask yourself, Step 1, is it telling a story? If yes, move to Step 2. Is it organized in 4-line stanzas, those quatrains? Step 3, tap out the rhythm. Does it alternate between 4-stress and 3-stress lines? And finally, Step 4, does it use an ABCB rhyme scheme? If you can check off these boxes, congratulations, you have successfully identified a ballad.
And that brings our class to a close today. But I won't let you leave without a quick homework assignment. We've seen how ballads were used to preserve the history, heroes, and tragedies of the past. So, I leave you with this question. If you were to write a traditional ballad today using the blueprint we just covered, what modern myth, hero, or dramatic event would you choose to preserve for the future? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep reading, and I'll see you in the next lesson.